Thank you so much for joining us, Adam. I've mentioned briefly to my class anyway what we're going to be talking about today, but just as a bit of a kind of got some context, we've got students from Manchester here today and students from London, and employers range from like PwC, Deloitte, Bank of America, and a few others. We've been covering this week. We've been covering like business plans, the lean canvas, different funding sources in the session before this, just in terms of like venture capital and seed funding and like angel investment and how all that kind of stuff works. We've been building an MVP this week. Students have been coming up with business ideas, and the goal of this week is for students to pitch their business ideas at the end of the week, and sort of as if they were going for investment, basically. So that's just a bit of context about kind of who you're talking to and like who's here today. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Adam. Just as a bit of an introduction to everyone, Adam is a seasoned entrepreneur and startup advisor, best known as the founder and former CEO of My2B, which was a mentorship platform that supported companies like Box and Nextdoor and Bruntwood, among others. Under his leadership, My2B gained recognition for its innovative approach to mentoring and diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging, initiatives through various employers. Adam is also a Bank of America alum, I believe, and was honoured at one point as one of JCI UK's 10 outstanding young persons. Currently, he is co-founder of AutoComply AI, a company helping startups and enterprise sales teams navigate compliance challenges. And beyond his own entrepreneurial efforts, Adam also actively mentors early stage founders and serves as a fractional exec across various accelerator programs. If I missed anything there, is there anything key you want to include before we jump in?
No, that's a good summary. Yeah.
Okay, great. You can thank ChatGPT for that. Okay, so let's jump into the first topic. I'm really interested in your kind of entrepreneur, like founder journey, basically. So My2B, which I just mentioned, can you tell us a bit about the origin story there and what kind of inspired you? What was your entrepreneurial kind of catalyst? What inspired you to start My2B?
Yeah, it was actually a mix of things with what I refer to as my accidental banking career, because banking wasn't something I necessarily planned, or I just sort of fell into it after university. I was like, what do I do now? I need to go and get a job. And the market and the world was kind of upside down because I graduated in 2008 when we had the global recession. And after quite a while, I eventually ended up working at BNY Mellon before Bank of America. And at BNY Mellon, as I was trying to progress, I was always like quite ambitious, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to get out of that in terms of a career. And there was a mentoring program which was genuinely life-changing because it cured what I refer to as my mid-20s crisis, where you're sort of going, oh God, this is real life. You sort of settle into this job and go, I get up every day and do this, and this is me now. It's like the reality sets in of that. And massive organization, completely siloed. So I imagine anyone who's working within these big organizations might have a similar experience. Very difficult for me to get a sense of direction. And I mentioned my ambitions to sort of progress within the business, but it was very linear or narrow-sighted. So like if I were to become a manager and I've got to wait for my manager to leave or something like that, before that position comes up. So it was, otherwise I'm going into a department I don't have a clue about, because you don't really interact with the other areas. And it was only through the mentorship program, which I was accepted onto, where that all changed. I was able to build a network. I was able to see the bigger picture of the business. I was able to see different like lines of sight and directions I could go, different countries I could get to and things like that, even if I wanted to. And it was just a massive game changer. And it then sort of made me think this program's limited to 100 people, because in the EMEA region, which is 20,000 people. And the main reason behind that was scale. So trying to run that program manually, where you're trying to match people individually, we're trying to follow up with email. and things like that. It's just impossible for one person. And they don't do it as their full-time job. They do it as like an ad hoc program. So for me, it was really obvious that technology could solve that. And I'm not technical. So just before I went into that side of it, something else had happened prior within the bank where I was really frustrated with our training processes. And the typical response, if I couldn't remember how to do something, would be go and check the procedure. And I'd have to find this procedure within SharePoint, which was a nightmare. I'd have to then locate the thing I was trying to find, and it might not be there, or it might be out of date, or it might be missing, or there's no visual representation of it. And that would lose an hour. And I'd be like, then I'd turn around to the manager and go, look, it's not there, it's out of date. How do I do it? 10 seconds later, they've shown me how to press the right button, off we go, I've remembered how to do it, I've made a note. So I got really frustrated with that and decided there's a better way of doing that, which would be, at the time, this sounds like really archaic now, but like at the time it was quite novel, which was just to record a process. So QuickTime was new at this point. And it was like, I was asking, can we get a license so I can record a process and do it that way? And they're like, no, but we've got a tool called Brainshark, I remember it being called, that allowed me to basically record a PowerPoint. So I screenshotted every single click of a button on a process and put it into a PowerPoint, added the notes, and then recorded it and did the voiceover. And I did all that in my own time. And I gave it my manager and went, there's what I'm talking about. That's how this should be. And my manager was blown away and they were like, this is unbelievable. And then they took it to the next layer up and they're like, this is incredible. So my manager then took that to India, where she trained like 400 people at once, who then had a resource that was clickable, scannable, you know, they can find it in minutes and seconds rather than hours. And it was consistent as well. So it mitigated like risk, it like mitigated the risk, it saved money, it saved time, everything. So I was like, this is it, I'm set now, I'm going to get my own department, we're going to go for it, like here we are, I'm off to the races. And they did nothing with it. And I pushed for it and I pushed for it and it got through like layers of management and it just falls down in the middle. Middle management don't care, because a lot of big organizations, people have their own very narrow ambitions and things like that and targets and everything else. And I got an award for it and I got like a pat on the back for it. And it was just like that experience though. The reason I mentioned that experience is because when I had the idea for my 2B, even though it was inspired by the bank, that had taught me that if I don't run with this, no one will. Like I can't give it to someone and tell them this is something they should do. Like I did with that. It was like, I have to go and do this. So not being technical at all, I just sort of sought out who I could. And I had a mate who worked at Late Rooms and he did a bit of web design stuff and he sort of gave me a bit of guidance on it in the initial bit. And I phoned Code Love, who are like an agency, and they said, oh, our websites start about 150 grand. And I nearly dropped the phone because I was like, that's a house. Like, you know, that I was like, I couldn't get my head around the cost side of it at all. And they put me in touch with a guy called Jamil, who was the founder of Wakelet, who you might have heard of. And he was like probably the lead startup on the scene at the time. He'd raised like £1 million from a few different people in the area and things like that. And he gave it a time, and he was building his development out through paying people through equity in that early instance. And I didn't feel too comfortable with that, but and I had a very limited budget of my own savings at that time. And I just thought, I'm going to do this. So I went and gate crashed a hackathon at the uni to find, for want of a better explanation of this, stereotypes. Kids who live in a dark room coding, and they're doing this at a weekend for fun. They're doing it as a CS course for uni. Like, this is what they love to breathe. So that's what I went and did. And I found a couple of guys, and I'm still in contact with one of them who I eventually helped with his application for Google when he moved on to that, because I was never going to stop him doing that. And they were fantastic. And it was that was the starting point. That was where we got an MVP. We got an early sort of use case with it. And I just kept pushing it. I started going to events outside of work. I started then taking time out from work, like using my own holidays to go to different things and everything else, and build up the momentum before taking that leap of faith.
Yeah, great. So then, that sounds like you were at the precipice of a new opportunity there. Obviously, you've got an MVP built, you've started to get users and interest and things like that. Can you tell us a bit about the transition there from kind of, because at that stage, in my experience as well, everything's quite positive and exciting, and you're kind of going up this kind of upward trajectory of like, there's new things all the time, you're meeting new people. When did it start to become like, like real life sets in and actually you're like, oh, this isn't just roses, there's challenges here? And what did that look like?
Yeah, well, there was a few things with it. Like, I was spending more and more time on it, and that is, like, say, there's all positive around that and everything else. And I actually got better at my job because it made I got more efficient at work to make sure I'd spend more time in the evenings and things, and had the energy to do both. And I think my parents at the time were a bit like, what the hell are you doing? You finally got like a decent career, even though the job wasn't great. It wasn't a great job, and I wasn't earning loads of money or anything. So it wasn't like, oh, if you leave, this, that, and the other. To be honest, there was a bit of an element of the risk is not having a go. But I just tried to take it as seriously as I could, and I took a week off at one point. And I remember I was at home at that point. I'd moved home as well to save up to build up for this. And when I took that week off, I was out the door earlier than I would have been for work to get to a meeting. And my dad was like, "Why are you off?" And I was like, "I'm doing this week." And he's like, "Oh, right." And I think that's when their buy-in came, which is massive, because it was like, I've moved back home for once, and I'm a burden there in that sense. And it's like, you're trying to, show that you're taking it seriously. And I was taking it seriously. But it becomes very real very quick, because, as soon as you're not getting a wage and everything else, and, I was very wet behind the ears, completely naive to it all. You think, like, you read about all the various things in America and everything, and investment and this, that, and the other, and you think, I'd get that, no problem. Gave myself a 6-month time frame, and ran out of money a couple of times doing that, like having to do odd jobs and things like that. And that becomes very real, because then you're like, when you're doing that, that's the bit where you're like, oh, is this ever going to turn a corner? You've been at it for 6 months. Like, where's this coming from? Where's that and the other? You need a bit of luck along the way, but you've just got to keep going at it for that. You just got to keep pushing for it, and that you create your own luck in those circumstances. But that's not to say there weren't times where, like, even in the early instances, I mean, there was a lot probably worse than that further ahead, but there was in those early instances, it does become real when you like, say, I'd moved home and things like that, so I kind of I was fortunate that I wasn't like having a mortgage or anything like that to cover, but at the same time, you've not got money to do anything. It's like you've got to go and get a bit of work for a bit and things like that. That's a very real situation that I had to do a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you touched there about giving yourself a sort of an ambitious timeline of 6 months to secure some funding. What was the reality with the way that you wanted to fund the business and how that worked out? And I know that you've led multiple funding rounds in your career. And what was your approach at the beginning, and how did that sort of evolve?
So my approach, again, I thought I'd done everything really sensible. Like, I'd pushed this as far as I could. It felt like the momentum was there. It was the right moment to take that leap of faith and everything else. It wasn't just I'm fed up of doing work and want to, go into this. It was a case of like, this is the right time because the momentum feels like it's right. And I've probably saved enough for 6 months, thinking I've given myself 6 months. Look what I've done in a week, kind of thing. Look what I've done in a few months part time. It was all, as much as it was all very like methodical and thought out. 6 months isn't enough, realistically. It's different now. Like if I was in that situation now and doing it, which I kind of am actually, there's a different way of doing it. But I always would say back then, should have given myself at least a year of like salary or costs or whatever it is. Look at your own circumstances and look at where you're going to have to spend money here and there. for things, events, travel, whatever it is, buying coffees, anything. Just make sure you've got sufficient runway to hit that milestone. For us, again, this is where the naivety and the early stage sort of thing is, and you see it a lot now with people still, is not fully understanding what their actual product is, or problem it's solving and who it's for. Like, a lot of people will applaud you for having a go at something, but whether they'll commit to something, use something, pay for something, invest in something, it's a very different conversation. And for us, we were thinking of it like this alternative LinkedIn kind of a thing to start with. But you need massive amount of people for that. You need critical mass to make it investable or turn on revenue taps with advertising. You see it so many times now in pitch decks when they go, we'll make money through advertising. It's like, you won't. Unless you've got a massive audience or massive user base, forget advertising as your business model. So unless you've got that on a wait list or something that you've not told us about, put that out the side. How's it going to make money? How are you going to reach the 100,000, 1 million people to make something happen in that sense? And that was the thing where it was completely naive, not understood. It took us a while to figure out the right revenue model and the right business model, through trial, error, mistakes, learning, which have become valuable lessons and everything else for now.
Yeah. I think you touched there upon a couple of common mistakes that are made, like relying on advertising as a revenue model, which realistically is not going to work unless you've got critical mass of users there. What are now in your sort of role, consulting and supporting other business owners who are going for investment? Because we've literally been talking about investment in the session before this one, so I think it's like on everyone's minds. What are some other mistakes that you see in like pitch decks and when people are approaching like either VCs or angels or whatever it might be?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways of looking at this. One that's common across everything is validation. So what validation have they got? If they're just someone with an idea saying, I need money to build it, that happens still sadly all the time, and it's not going to happen. Like, no one, angels, anything, your parents and family, anyone like that, friends putting in, that's even a challenge for them, right? And the barrier to entry for building something, especially in software now, is massively reduced. So like with tools like Bolt and Lovable, you can spin up a working prototype, a clickable version of something that will work, although it won't be properly functional. You still really need dev talent to make it authenticated and everything else. You can do it for like almost nothing and in almost no time. So if you're saying, oh, I've got this idea to this, and yes, it might be wildly complicated, the barrier to entry can be so reduced now. And you need that validation. You need to turn up with something. We've spoke to 100 customers. We've got 10 of them signed up for a pilot once it's built. We've got 10 letters of intent. We've got 1,000 people on a wait list. You need something backing it all up to prove it out. And you can, there's things like you can go and get people paying you before you build it. They can sign up and go, I'm paying a deposit for something. I'm paying for that. It might be a nominal fee. It might be a really small amount, but it's commitment to show that they want it. That is something that's massively missed out a lot. Getting validation, getting true validation, to show that there's an actual reason for it. And the only way you get past validation of that is validation of you, because often an angel, a VC, anyone is backing the founder or founders. And if that's someone they know, that's even easier. If they don't know them, but they like the way you carry yourself and everything else, they'll back you. I mean, there's a famous story I've told you before about how we got our first investor, which was Scott Fletcher of A&S. And it was at Business Rocks, which he'd invested in. And I was trying to get an intro to him all night. Hadn't managed it. Seen him on his own for the first time. Ran over to him. I'm in a branded hoodie of my 2B. And he knew what I was doing. I was thinking I'll just introduce myself and say I'll try and say hello tomorrow or something. And he goes, come on, you've got 3 floors, get in. Dive in the lift with him. Absolutely no idea what came out of my mouth about what the product is or whatever. But we got to the bottom and he said, so how committed are you? And I was like, I've sold my car, I've moved home, I put all my own money in, I'm all in on this. And he's like, okay, I'll have that. Give me a chat tomorrow. That was it. First investor. Like, and it was all about commitment and me. Didn't really care about what the product was. Probably was just thinking, I can put some money into that lad and see where he goes. That was his thinking. And even now, I had someone come to me last week, and they're trying to build something very similar, and I've been helping them out with a bit of advice. And they're like, they're agencies, like, so that's their background. They're like, oh, we're going for investment so we can build it. I'm like, no one's going to give me money for that. The only reason they might is the guy who's doing it has exited 3 other businesses. So they might just back him to go, this might not be a right idea, but we'll back him because he's got a history. So he might be able to make the idea work. But they've got no validation of anyone wanting it and wanting to pay for it, wanting to use it. There's a lot of market data that suggests this might work. There's zero validation, like literally zero validation from what they've done. And, you know, that's it again. But so that's the biggest mistake, challenge that everyone misses out is pre-validation before you even build anything. Before you write a line of code, can you get validation from people to say, we want this and we'll pay for it and sign up? The other misconception is understanding, which hopefully you, with your workshop, you've covered with the type of investor. People, so Manchester with VCs, there aren't really any. There's people who will call themselves VCs, but they're not. They're pretty much mostly PE dressed up as VC. And they're very different animals. You know, PE is very, you know, people are not the best.
PE being private equity.
Yes, sorry, yeah. So if I use any analogies or anything that or acronyms, just shout.
I should also mention, I forgot to say at the beginning, if anyone has any questions while we're going, Adam's happy to field questions like as we go. So please just raise your hand if any questions come to mind. Sorry, Karen.
Yeah. So there was, there's as many acronyms in startups as there are in what used to be nicknamed the Bank of Acronyms for anyone who's at Bank of America. So yeah, if there's any acronyms that no one understands, just shout. But the so PE have a very different model. You know, they want to grow it to a point and then move it on or sell it for parts almost sometimes. VC is about all encompassing, 100x return kind of thing. So if you're pitching a VC, it's understanding that they're not just rich people around the table throwing money at ideas. They've gone out and raised money from what are called LPs. And then they've gone to deploy that money on the basis that they will return the fund and more. So if they've got $100 million fund, their percentage of what they invest in you at the end when they exit should ideally return that fund. So if they end up with 10% of your business on exit, they need that to be worth 100 million, which means you have to be worth $1 billion. So if you've not got a business or a product or an idea that will scale to that level, a VC won't touch it. Angels have slightly different kind of, they all have their own individual connotations to what they believe you'll get and their kind of ideal return on everything and everywhere else. Some of them might just throw it as a punt because of a tax year end or something and go, oh, we'll get SEIS on this. It's a very real thing. So it's understanding the type of investor, understanding the mechanics of that investor, and also understanding their motivations. I think when you go into people, you need kind of to make sure you go into the right ones for the right reasons, which I think is missed. Sadly, I think a lot of that's down to the people and how they portray themselves in Manchester in particular. Like, you know, saying they're a venture firm or whatever, they're not. So that can be a bit jarring. But yeah, I think that's the two things for any investment conversation: is the validation of what you've done, you know, what you're doing, and then the actual getting the right type of investor.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned there about sort of the requirements for investors, whether that's like private equity or VC, in terms of like you need traction, you need customers, or you need a wait list, or you need validation, you need some kind of proof that people want this before any money's going to be given to you. As I understand it, there's been kind of a slowdown in this kind of funding in the last few years, like since COVID. Do you think, like, I'm interested in your thoughts on the many, because I'm sure there's like multiple reasons for that. I'm interested in your perception. But you kind of touched on like how low the barrier to entry is now, especially in the last kind of 6 to 12 months with the introduction of these AI prototyping tools. Do you think that has something to do with it in terms of like it's way easier for people to create businesses now and way easier to just have an idea and visualize it, but it's much more difficult to actually prove the idea and show that it's something that has legs? Or what are your thoughts beyond that in terms of why funding might have slowed down?
Yeah, so I think the funding slowdown was definitely people getting their asses kicked from the last few years, rise of cost of everything. We've seen that across every industry. So that was where there was a lot of that sort of money not getting deployed. The shift in gear with AI has turned that on its head a bit. So money is getting invested now. But people have got money they need to spend, kind of thing. We're getting to that point again where people have got funds that need to be deployed. Especially in the States. So I don't think AI is an actual bubble, but I think there's a bubble within AI in terms of a moment in time where people are going to get a load of money spent on it and thrown at it. But it's still very early. But you're absolutely right that yes, it's very easy now to start something and low cost and cheap, but actually still getting validation for it is a totally different thing. That's still required. But there's another point actually about sort of the misconceptions with the investment side of it is, do you need investment? That's the question that's not always asked. Like, what do you need it for? Like, people often think, oh, I need it because it's, we've got no money and we're 2 people or I'm 1 person or whatever. And we need to get it built and get it marketed and spend it on marketing to get it out to people and get them buying it. And that's not an answer. Like, the reason for investment is to hit a milestone. It's like, right, we have managed to organically on our own get to this point. With investment, we'll get to that point, whether that's a milestone of revenue or a number of users, whatever it is, to keep it going, things like that. And then actually with this amount of investment, we'll capture this part of the market. We'll be able to become the number 1 player by the end of the year. That kind of thing needs to be the reason for investment. So that's why it's still challenging, actually. Even though it's easier to get into a prototype, build something, get something out there, you still need to cut through the noise and validate it and get people using it, get people paying for it, and then show actually there's a scale side to it as well. So for investment, and it's that thing of like knowing the right type of investor, going, well, if it's venture, how are you going to become the number 1 player in this market when it's so easy to build something? That's it. Your moat, the famous saying about a moat, for those that have not heard that, is basically what's your protection around what you do, because especially with tech, IP isn't always the answer to that. Perfect example, Snapchat and Instagram, how many, copying each other as they move side by side, happened a million times, and absolutely nothing could be done about feature copying. Dating websites with the swiping mechanism that Tinder pioneered. No one's sued them or whatever. In fact, they were acquiring each other or whatever. So it's one of them. It's very difficult to protect. But the moat is the brand. The moat is the first mover advantage sometimes. So that's how you can then become venture backable. Is that actually we've got these core customers. We've nailed this part of the market already. We've got people coming to us. There's showing a level of demand. Again, it comes down to that validation piece.
Yeah, you mentioned there about kind of investment might not be the right path for everybody, but B, about the importance of choosing the right type of investment and the right type of investor. From your experience, because we've spoken today about kind of smart money and dumb money, and this idea that actually when you go for investment, you should really be looking for more than just the money. There should be kind of connections there or other kind of strategic advice and lived experience and things like that. So in your eyes, what makes a good what makes an investor a good partner beyond the money?
We've had a mix of both, to be honest, in the past, and ultimately you're going to be one of many, right? So I wouldn't hang your hat on it too much that the investor's going to be the game changer for you with introductions or even advice or anything like that. They may be committed that they'll meet with you once a month or something, almost like a non-exec, which can be fantastic. Ultimately, you're the one who's on the ground doing it day in, day out, every night of the week and everything else. So that whilst that can be useful, they can put you in touch with people. It's not a silver bullet. So I think the thing around money is like, the term dumb money and everything else and smart money. I always think there's a bit of a pointless argument around that. It's just if they're going to commit and what that commitment looks like. Right? They want to buy in. Are you going to be involved? Are you going to be able to help if we ask? Yes. Okay. Have you got anyone you can put us in touch with? Yes. No. Great. Whatever. We had investors we didn't even meet, as mad as that sounds, because they came via another investor and just like the idea. We met one of them who represented 3 of them, and he was like, yeah, fine, signed off, done. We had others where we had an investor who we basically got to know over a couple of months before they committed, and that was great, and that worked really well. But we did that again with another investor, and I remember we got to Christmas, and Damien, my business partner, and myself went for a drink over Christmas, and I was like, what do you make of them? And they were like, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm like, yeah, I'm not having that either. Like, we've been dragged along for a few months. We don't seem to be moving any closer. Like, it's that shit or get off the pot kind of situation. Like, are you interested or not? Like, we're spending loads of time trying to justify ourselves to you instead of actually, we could be getting on with others and getting on with more customer stuff and everything else. And we actually did a pitch event over Zoom and got an investor that day. And it's like, here's what you want. If someone who just turns up, right, I get this, I'm having it, send me the information. Yeah, okay, I can do X amount, done. Like, that's, you don't want to be dragged along. You don't, it's easy to fool yourself and do that because you think, oh, we've got someone interested. And it's the same with customers or anyone. You want people who are going to commit and do it, as quickly as possible. And then once they're in, right, what are you bringing to the table? Absolutely nothing. I'm going to sit back. You're never going to see me. Okay, thank you very much. We'll keep you updated. And they might periodically drop by and give you information and everything else, but it just comes down to it that you're the one going to be doing it day in, day out, every day, every night. So they're not a silver bullet. I think if you can have a good rapport with them and you've got, you've done your checks on them and everything else, everything's good. Generally, they should be all right.
Yeah. As you might know, Adam, my business was entirely bootstrapped, so this whole world of investors is totally new to me. So I'm fascinated by this idea of your journey on the 3 floors in the lift, and this investor that's just like, yeah, that sounds great, and this idea that you just have a Zoom call, meet someone that day, and they're like, yeah, I'm in. But it's kind of it kind of surprises me and doesn't surprise me, because with my background in sales and business development, that's kind of how big deals happen as well, where it's like people work with people and they just get a vibe off someone, and if you kind of tick all the boxes, all the kind of due diligence boxes, they just want to invest in you and they want to work with you. So speaking of obviously you mentioned kind of you were a bit surprised by especially that first investor in the lift and that kind of process and how you kind of just left there like, oh, did that really just happen kind of thing. What are some other moments that surprised you about the whole world of investment that you didn't appreciate going into it?
So first off, I mean, it made it sound so easy that, but because it absolutely wasn't. I mean, that investor we did over the Zoom thing, we were at a point of like, right, we've got really big name customers here now. We've got other investors and everything else. And even then, it wasn't, like I say, we've been strung along by someone for months at that point. So it's not easy. It is that moment though, like you say, you find the right people and you click with them and everything else. Whereas like with Scott first time around, at that point, I was again, very precipitous moment of like, fuck it, I'm on the edge here. And it's like I say, we've gone past the 6 month line now, we're into 8 months to a year, and it's like, Christ, is it, you're at that point where you might be packing it in and it's like, oh, there we go, we've got our investment. Like, wow, game changer. It's not easy for a start. I think the other surprises are sometimes the not great experiences. So we had an investor who I think that again there's naivety from my part, like being wet behind the ears with it, but understanding things around their commitments and everything, I should have been more aware of, which it ultimately didn't work out with that investor. They were an agency who were bringing in dev work as part of that equity, and there was stuff going on in the background I didn't know about with their business and things like this, and it was like, so they were hot and cold, and that's going back to that commitment side of it. Don't think they're going to be an ultimate partner, but we were treated like an agency client, whereas I thought we were going to be like an employee kind of side of it. Like, let's ballpark 50K of development. I look at that as like, well, that's an engineer for a year kind of thing. Where it's like, hold on, 6 weeks in, 20 grand's gone, because it's like, you've got a project manager, you've got a design, it's this kind of, I was like, where's this? What's going on? And we ended up with nothing. And it was, I think it was an unfortunate experience that didn't work out, but I don't think it was through bad intentions or anything like that. It just wasn't the right model. So that's something to understand as well. Is like, if you're going to get into it with anyone, find out about them from as many people as you can. Work with them. Good, bad. That's something you should always ask an investor as well. Is like, okay, tell me who your wins are. Right, go and speak to them over there. Great, find out about them. Right, tell me where it's not worked out. Right, I'm going to go speak to that founder as well and find out what they say about it. And that's something I think people need to be aware of as well when they're doing that, is if they're going to get involved with people, if there's going to be a proper commitment of any kind, find out where it's worked out, where it hasn't.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a platform, isn't there now, that's like Trustpilot for investors, where like founders can essentially rate and review investors, and you can go and kind of check people out before you work with them, which is interesting. I can't remember the name of it. I'll have to try and find it. I only heard about it last week. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that makes for good reading. Because obviously, like, we've spoken on the module as well about the kind of entrepreneur journey and the ups and downs that entrepreneurs face in terms of pressures and stress on your mental health and things like that, whether you get investment or not. I think that there's obviously kind of a lot to consider there. We've spoken today about the idea that, and obviously for me personally, this isn't from lived experience, but like the idea that if you were to have investors, shareholders, especially when you get to the stage where you have multiple investors that control a significant portion of the company, that will undoubtedly have an effect on the way that you, like, your relationship with the business and the way that you perceive your role within the business. How did you find that personally as a founder who kind of grew and through funding? How did that affect your mental health?
So first time around, we did really well to remain in control. So that allowed the autonomy for us to go at it our way, kind of thing. So we never really had that overwhelming pressure of things are outside of our control or out of our hands. But you've got, responsibilities there. So that was the thing that comes with it, that people can mistake or not consider. You're responsible. And we were always as responsible as we could be. Like, we treated, whether someone gave us a tenner or 10 grand or 100 grand, whether it's a customer or an investor, treated that preciously. And I think there's not always a lot of that in some cases. In terms of the mental health side, it's brutal. There's no other way of putting it. It's absolutely savage. It's the toughest thing I've ever been through. It pushed me to the point of breaking many a time. My first bit of advice when I meet any founder now is look after yourself, physically, financially, mentally. Just make sure that's the number one priority, because if any of them dominoes fall, the business falls. And it's very easy, and this is again being naive that I did, is where you're not taking enough of a salary or something, and it's like, you don't have to be on stupid money, just like make sure you're covering your bills, or actually not just your bills, but actually like you've got a bit of a buffer. So let's say there's a bad month and you go, I'm not going to pay myself this month. You're not then panicking going, what am I going to do? I'm going to get evicted. Like, making sure you're looking after those kind of things is a reasonable conversation to have with an investor as well. So, look, there's what we're going to get, because they say, I don't want to pay you a salary. It's like, no, we're going to do this, and we need to cover a team, and it's going to cover that, and there's what I'm going to be paying myself at. It's a very reasonable conversation to have. Everyone's got their own responsibilities, whether it's family, mortgage, whatever it is, to cover. So if that's where you're doing that to hit a certain point, make sure that's part of it, because you also don't want to be looking over your shoulder. If you've got nothing to worry about outside the business, you focus on the business is going to be so much better, where you're not worried about those other things. You're giving yourself time to relax where you can, whatever that is, whether you play a sport, reading, watching films, anything like, you need your own time out to switch off and have that where you can then be like, right, I'm totally refreshed and ready to go. You need to make that time. And it's very easy to slip into the presenteeism of, I can't take any time out on, things aren't going well. I've got to be chained to a desk 24 hours. It's like, well, actually, you can do more in an hour than you can in 24 if you're at the right level of productivity, balance, everything else. So you've got to make sure you first priority sounds selfish, but it's for the right reasons, is you. Like I say, first thing to do, make sure you're looked after physically, financially, mentally. Like if those things are okay, everything else should be working well.
Yeah. So how do you recognize, so with the kind of startups and entrepreneurs that you work with through your mentoring and consulting and things like that, how do you recognize like startups who you think are fundable or scalable, or like also touching on the kind of mental health aspect, how do you identify startup founders that might struggle with that, and to kind of almost like gently have the conversation of like, are you sure this journey is for you, kind of thing? What are you looking for when you have those conversations, and how much is it even your job to kind of advise on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the mentoring through the program based stuff was making, I mean, it's aligned with the program, right? But I'd always be very honest about it and say anything I say or give you advice on is purely based on my experience. So take it with a pinch of salt. You've got to take that advice on board whatever way you want. You've got to trust your gut instinct and the knowledge you've got. I'm just going to tell you what I see or what I understand. So I'd always be very open about that from the start. But I think it is that thing in you recognizing the founder, right? They might have the best idea in the world, but not be the right founder. They might have the worst idea in the world, be a great founder. And it's that thing, you can spot them and go, I can see if they get backing, they'll do something, kind of thing. You sort of look at that and go, I can see they've got that something about them. Whereas others, you look at them and going, they're not going to do anything. Like, and it's not being harsh or whatever. It's like they might just be first time around. So when I sort of re-emerged into the startup world, like I was trying to actually start a new business just because it was like, this is what I know and do, kind of thing. Which I had to have a bit of a word with myself as I was coming across first time founders going, do I really want to go into this again? Like, this is insane, like watching them. But then I'm like, oh, it's because they're first time founders. Like you can spot when you've done it, you can spot a first time founder a mile away, absolute mile away. And it's like, and it's the thing that I come back to every time with them is validation. It's like, if you keep having that conversation and you're not proving validation, you have to question it then. That's where you're going, what have you done to validate it? Where's that conversation gone? Like, why is that not? Where are these users? Where are these customers that you can? Because especially if the pitching around investment, one of the first things I saw with the AI accelerator in Manchester was there was a guy who was pitching, and they said we've got 20,000 users, 2,000 of which are paid, which is good, right? But then he's like, with £1 million investment, we'll do 3 million in the first year. And I was like, where the hell are you going? What figure where have you pulled that from? And I hate doing that because it's like in the UK, you get very business plan driven and spreadsheet driven, which is largely bollocks in this industry, because so much of it doesn't ever match up. Which is, you go to America, it's not about that at all. It's a very different dynamic. Yes, you should understand those things, but the amount of times you don't need it here to get started. But like, they've got some customers and it's like, right, you've got 20,000 there and you've got 2,000 paying. How are you going to get to 200,000? Like if you did 10x, if you've got £2,000 a month coming in and then you get to 200k, that's an unbelievable return. But you're going to say you're going to go to 3 million, and there was no point of how they were going to do it. Oh, we'll spend this on marketing. We'll spend it. It's like, no, like, look, what buttons, what levers are you pulling on the ones that you've got working already? In fact, why can't you go from 2 to 4 to 10 out of the ones you've got? Why is 18,000 not paying for it? What's going on there? Like, you're not just gonna, money isn't magic. I think that's the other thing, is that just money is not magic. Just having money is not going to solve these problems. You've got to do a lot of organic stuff and get it working in the first instance to make that happen. So you see a lot of that with founders, where there's a very naive thing of, oh, if I have this, we'll do that, without the actual thought behind it, right? And the mechanism behind it, which is where, even though I've just slagged it off, the spreadsheet bit can come into it. Like, you go, oh, if we had $1 million, we spend it on this, this, and this. It'll, based on what we've already done. But that's the thing, even if you're very early, it's like, I can't. That's what I find jarring with some of these pre-seed funds and everything else. Is, oh, we want to see a 5-year projections. When we're taking you on an idea, it's like, where are you going to get a projection for 5 years on an idea with no background to it? It just doesn't make sense. So that's a big challenge. But yeah, I think if you're going to talk about numbers and figures and traction, you need something to back it up. Even if you go, right, we've been live for a month and we've got 100 signups. Great. Live for a month, spent X amount, 100 signups. So if you spend 10 times that, will you get 10 times the amount of signups, 100 times the amount of signups, based on what? So that's the thinking I think people need behind it when it comes to that. It's just, yeah. And I think with founders, the resilience side, like I say, when you're first getting into it, the enthusiasm is admirable and almost envious of it now. So excited and everyone's buzzing for you and it's everything else, and I'm like, you sort of sat there going, oh, you've not had your ass kicked yet, wait till that. And it's like, can you get through that?
So like a couple of things you've said, we've kind of like touched on this idea that the founder, like as a person, with that idea of that one example where you gave, where it's like scaling up and the numbers aren't there, and it's like, how are you going to achieve that? That's sort of like naturally like a red flag that founder isn't the kind of detail oriented sort of process driven person that might be a successful founder. And this idea that actually the idea is almost secondary with investment, and even indeed with like business success generally, let alone like outside of investment. The idea is secondary. It's like the person and their kind of grit and determination, because if the idea doesn't work, a successful founder will kind of pivot and find an alternative idea, or they'll find an alternative market, or they'll kind of find a way to adapt it and change it. Did you have to like make kind of pivoting decisions in your journey, and how do you decide when is the right time for that? And what is your approach to that?
Yeah, so I can give an example from first time, and I can give an example now with autocomply. So first time around, it was a case of like, mentoring can be in so many different dynamics and verticals and everything else. It can be an open platform where people can just connect. It can be something used in education. It can be something used in the public sector. It can be something used in networks. It can be something used in businesses. So it was like, right, how do we pick a lane out of all them? We went for everything, which was stupid, because you end up kind of, jack of all trades, master of none. And it was like, well, this is kind of doesn't really fit for anyone in particular. It kind of just is a bit amalgamated for everyone. It was only when we kind of, the penny dropped with B2B, which was, we didn't have to educate them because they had a mentoring program. So they knew what mentoring was and the value in it. They've clearly invested something in it already to put a program together, even if it's minimal. They've got the challenge of doing it all manually. And you've got the adoption and buy-in from the employees, the mentors and the mentees. They've got that problem with scale through no technology. So it was like all these boxes were ticked. And it was like, right, if we present the solution to them, we're actually solving a problem for a start. And they've got budget, and we can go, right, we can charge for that. So that was like, bang, game changer. Like, that's it. And that's how we go.
So that was, pivoting from like being direct to consumer and trying to target individuals, and then targeting the employers instead.
Yeah, so it was that classic, go niche to scale, right? But we kind of went through going everywhere first to find the niche kind of thing. We didn't pick a single lane to start with and go down that route. Whereas now with autocomply, we've validated it to death before we've written a line of code. We've got customers basically agreed before we've written a line of code, through constant validation, questions back and forth. Originally, the very basic idea would have been automated questionnaire completion, which through just validation process, we found out not enough people really need that properly, or there's already things emerging in the market for that. doesn't really do what we need this to do. So that's going to move on from that straight away, and then we go to this platform idea, and it's like there's already things in the market that we don't want. Why go and build a copy of $1 billion business? And it's like, you're going to get hammered for that. And then we found the niche with, right, actually, what if we have an agent that acts as your co-worker that's a data protection officer, because it can work within those systems and it can work within those questionnaires. It can do a bit of everything. And we started having those conversations with people, and they're like, yeah, that'd be massively useful. And you start finding the right area of the market and everything else. So like, it's that thing of like, you can pivot from, the pivot doesn't have to be a complete like 180 on something where you go, oh, we were doing this and we're now doing that. Like, I think Branch Metrics in the States started out as like a pet tracker or something, and then they became this data analytics company. Totally different things, but like, they figured this thing out internally. I mean, Slack were a gaming company. They built the internal tool, and then ran out of money with the gaming, and when we've got that thing we've been using, do you reckon anyone else would use it? There you go, rest is history. Totally different thing again. So there's lessons in pivots can be just like identifying, where you've got something working, where you've got something that hasn't. Something hasn't, and it's like, why is it not working? Like, if you can answer that and go, no one wants it. And be honest with yourself. Who don't want that? Right. Who does? Them. Or actually, does anyone want this? Or actually, we solved our own problem by doing this before. Wonder if anyone else would find that useful. That's where you can make the decision on a pivot. Like, say with auto-comply, it was like, there's the original thinking. Go and talk to people about it. Okay, there's something in it, but then it changes to this. Right, that would be a better solution. That kind of already exists. Does anyone else want to be paying for that even low barrier? Big challenge? No. Here's an idea. What about that? So that kind of thing, like just back and forth with the people you're going to be working with. And then once you've done that, now we can go and build a prototype, an MVP, get it in the hands, get them breaking it, get them telling us, I need this added on, I need that removed, I don't need that. Because people can build and go mad feature heavy when 90% of the features aren't needed, or requested. And that was a good thing we used to have as a dynamic between myself and Damien, is I'd be all chasing rainbows, going, oh, what about this idea, and do that, let's do this. And then he'd go, no one wants it, no one's asked for it. Yeah. Any request for that, I'm like, yeah, but wouldn't it make it better? It's like, yeah, I agree. I think it would make it better, but we should test it somewhere first. And it's like, okay, yeah, let's do that. So they'd be like, right, rather than a mass rollout of a new feature or something like that, or building this thing, taking time out of, even things like tech debt to go and work on a new feature that no one's asked for. You constantly get that idea that it's going to change the game for us, and everything. That's that feature will not everything. It doesn't. It's just, it's back and forth with users and customers and everything else.
Yeah. With this idea of pivoting and that kind of back and forth and learning as quickly as possible and adapting and stuff, it's a bit of an insight into the sort of mania that is involved in a startup, and just all the different plates that are spinning and different things, different moving parts. Because as a founder, especially in the early days, you're involved with, like, you have to wear all the hats, right? You're involved in across the co-founder relationship, potentially you're involved in like finance and building a team, like growth and process and all these different things, which in a larger company would have dedicated people for each thing. Are there any kind of frameworks or like tools or advice or methodologies that you have found which just kind of gives some structure to that and it sort of puts you on rails with that? Or is it just about like embracing the chaos and finding your own way?
I think it is more, sadly, about embracing the chaos. You kind of have to find, what works for you in that way, and how you work best, and then beyond yourself. When you start building a team, how's that going to look? You can have, there's so many examples of teams who are all in an office. There's massive companies now where 5 people strong. There's people who are fully remote, all over the world, kind of thing. It's that different dynamic, and you've got to, I think it's just a case of, let's say it starts with yourself. First off, find out what works best for you, time-wise, routine-wise, anything else. Put the discipline in place if you need a routine or whatever to get moving in the first instance. if you then have a co-founder, right, how do you two work best? How do you two bounce off each other? Is it that you're going to get an office and be in that every day? Is it going to be that you're going to catch up once a week physically, something like that, and then you work remotely for the rest of it? What is it? And then it's just sort of as you add layers to it, trying to work out how that works best for the team, for you, for the company, for the, because we did a lot with the US, so we didn't necessarily need to be in an office every day in the daytime, right? It'd be a lot of evening stuff. So you realistically want to be at home because you don't want to be getting, driving late or trams late or anything into town from an office. So there'd be a lot of stuff at home. We might catch up in the day and make sure we at least call up once or twice a week physically. But if most of my time is going to be like, right, I'm on sales calls to the US from the afternoon onwards to late evening. Like, I don't want to be traipsing in and out of town, like for the sake of it. It's like, well, I won't do that. So, there's days when that's necessary. Go in and do something or whatever, and make sure you do. It's just, again, I think it's a case of figuring out how you work. Then, as you add the layers, how do they work together? How do you work together? And just making sure you can keep that. But there's definitely chaos. Like, that's always going to be the case. There's always going to be something where there's going to be a meltdown and everyone needs to jump on it and stuff like that. That just happens.
How much did you kind of miss coming from an employed background? How much did you miss the guardrails and the structure and the things like that? Did you not at all? Did you kind of love that freedom and flexibility, or did you? Yeah, how did you feel about that?
Yeah, I didn't miss it at all because I felt trapped by it in the first instance. Like talking about productivity, I say if you've got the right balance and everything, there's times you can do more in an hour than you can in 8. And the nature of my role, I was at a desk 8 hours, 12 hours a day most of the time actually, but just at a desk, and it's like with what I'm good at, I'm good with people. We'll be getting in front of people, getting to that's where things happen. Like when I'm at a desk, I'm not a developer, I'm not an engineer, I'm not doing that. It's like desk work for me is the stuff I have to do and I have to dedicate time to it. But my best skill is being around people and getting amongst it. So that's where I'm most valuable. Whereas that's where I think you've got to work out what you need to do. There's an element of the safety net. It's great to know you've got X amount of salary coming in at the end of the month without even thinking about it. Almost, you do your job, well enough, unless you do something horrendous and you're not going to get sacked or whatever. You're going to keep the level of that being like, yep, that is absolutely fantastic to have that. And that is great for millions of people. But if you don't feel built for that, that's where, like I say, I wasn't in a overly fantastic position with career. It wasn't like earning daft money and going, oh, what a wonderful opportunity, I'm leaving. It's like, this is pretty crap. So I might as well go out and go at that and find out, because that could be something I could always go back to, worst case. So it's like, that was the thinking. But yeah, I mean, again, it's like my circumstances were a bit easier in that I'm not got missus, not got kids. Everyone's got different responsibilities. So I think that's something people have to manage when they think about it. Like, who's around you that's going to get impacted by you? Because it's not just actually, financial responsibilities, but I think the thing about when you jump into being a founder and you're in founder mode is you're always on, like always on. And the amount of things I've been at over the last 10 years now, where I just wasn't present. I was in the room, but I just wasn't. My head was elsewhere. You're in mid-conversation with someone, and you're sort of just drifting off doing this, going almost chatting away to yourself because something's come up and you've got that to do. It's crap. That's really bad, like in that sense. And that's where it's really difficult. But I mean, some people get that with a day job anyway, but not the level that you've got that 24 hours a day on kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's again that's going to be down to the individual.
Yeah, I'm interested in the fact that you've had that kind of corporate experience and gone through the kind of startup founder journey, and sort of worked again with corporates through Mighty and as clients from the other side, and I'm sure had kind of touch points with corporates since then in other forms. What is your kind of biggest takeaway in terms of like the difference between culture, risk appetite, things like that in terms of corporates versus startups and scale-ups?
I mean, they're vastly different. Yeah, I mean, corporate culture is, I mean, the irony is if you become a successful startup or successful, you'll end up becoming a corporate, won't you? You know, any of them do. But yeah, it's a very different environment. Obviously, with a small startup, you're working with a very close-knit team and you are responsible for a lot. Whereas in a big corporate, you're one of many kind of thing. You're a number. Whilst they might promote a lot around corporate, you know, culture and values and everything else, how much of that is actually lived day to day? Not always. I mean, sadly, we saw the result of corporate culture with Mighty V. Why we moved on from it in the end was we'd spent like best part of it 2 years where we'd been growing through the sort of advent and rise of people taking care of their employees and valuing them and wanting to grow people internally and things like valuing things like DEI. So then suddenly there was a market crash. So they go, right, overnight we got rid of 30% of our workforce because it's the easiest thing in the world to change the bottom line. So 30% of the workforce have gone overnight. The first people out the door are DEI teams, and the share price goes up. So you're like, oh, so you all that noise about how you care about your people, you actually didn't care at all. And it's a very difficult pill to swallow because it was like we believed in what we were doing. But you know, we had clients who were fantastic and really did care about the people. And I think there is a mix of that where you get that people. Some people say they do, others do. Well, that's a difference. But the dynamic of working in a startup versus a large corporate is alien. Like, it's completely different. It'd almost be worth anyone who's thinking about doing a startup, if you can work within one first, even a slightly scaling one or something like that, then you'll get a taste for what's involved. See the chaos before you've got your own. Yeah, it's not a bad place to start because you'll get the understanding of it.
You touched there on the kind of corporate attitude to EDI and like equality and inclusion and those kinds of initiatives, and your experience of, you know, how that's been through your business, and your passion with that, right? Like, that's kind of what the business is founded on. How can new startup businesses embed those values into their kind of growth strategy to kind of try and mitigate against this idea that they might become this corporate that, you know, for whatever reason doesn't prioritize that? How can you kind of embed that from the start?
It's by doing just that, really, and sort of outlining, you know, your own values from the off, and that can come from your hiring, you know, process from the first instance, and anything else you want to do, sort of living and breathing it, and you know, not just saying it kind of thing is definitely how you can do that. I mean, it's I think a lot of corporates, not to try and relieve them of this, but just to, like, almost giving them the benefit of the doubt, for want of a better phrase. It's kind of something that was always brought upon them. There's always this new thing you've got to deal with. Like, that's enough. You know, we've got to figure it out. And it's going against what they know. So I think that was a challenge for a lot of them, is understanding it. And it's a challenge for a lot of people, understanding it. It was a continuous learning curve for us, for me. And we were, you know, very well recognised and received awards for it and everything for what we were doing with it. But we almost had a very pure play on it, in that the whole thing was about developing underrepresented talent, represented people, showing them there's a door where they can go through and get help and get elevated, and it educated both sides through mentorship. It's very altruistic nature of what mentoring is, which allowed us to do that. So if you're setting up anything from the off, you know, maybe there is some way of learning about each other or mentorship from the off, even in a small company where you can have that sort of practice put in. And I think it's with anything, if you don't want to lose something, or as you grow, You've got to have it from the start. Like you say, it's literally a case of get it embedded from the start, and then you can move forward with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we kind of approach the end, I had a load of questions. I feel like I've tried to go on through each question naturally, but now I've just got a load of miscellaneous questions. So these are going to be a bit like handbrake turns.
Yeah,
but what so you now act as a kind of a fractional consultant, mentor, obviously helping other people with their businesses, which is not related to your ventures necessarily. What prompted you to do that? Where was the motivation there, and what do you enjoy about that kind of work?
Necessity is the best answer I can give, because I didn't have a clue what I was going to do next. It was like
Okay.
it was like me and Damien were looking at other ideas and everything else. Can we do something else?
Next, sorry, just for context. So what happened with Mighty B at this point? Why were you in that situation?
So we just shut down. Because it was just a case of we'd had a few different things before that point where we were a bit unfortunate with timing around some of our we were going for $1 million investment. We had some of it committed. That market collapse I was talking about kind of hit, and that kind of fell by the wayside. We mentioned early on in the conversation around what's happened with investment over the last few years, where it all dried up. So it was back to the drawing board with customers. We'd stretched ourselves too thin as a team. So we were basically rebuilding our entire pipeline because we'd gone all in on the investment side, which again, there's a lesson there, as much as investment takes a full-time commitment, never neglect one side to do the other. So that was sounds a really obvious lesson now, and we knew it at the time, but as I mentioned, we'd stretched ourselves so thin. So when it came to that point where we're we can't see the scale opportunity, we can't see this growing without significant resource and investment. And we even had some of our existing investors were happy to put a bit more money in. We recognise, we think the market just isn't there. The writing's on the wall for what we're doing. We don't see this becoming the opportunity it could have been, and not for a while anyway. And that was best part of 18 months, 2 years ago now. So that's we knew then, and that was the right thing. And coming out of that, I didn't have a clue what I was going to do, because to me, this was my identity. It was everything I was going to ever do. It was going to be my life's work, and it just turned out not to be. So it was there was an element of, when we started to get to that point, I was having some conversations with friends and people I knew and respected and everything else, who were able to try and help and everything else. And the reaction was fantastic. There was no there's a very thing, you always feel really guilty of the fact, it didn't work out or whatever. Failure in the UK is a very different lens to, say, the US, where it's almost oh, good, you got it out of the way, go, what's the next thing? Whereas over here, you're like a pariah, and it's get rid of them, don't want to see them again. So that was the kind of worry with it. And it was at that point where, like I say, the people we were speaking to, the more people we spoke to, the more we realised the reaction was going to be fairly positive, if anything else. And just put the hand in the air kind of thing, sort of announced it, and then it was hey, we've announced it, and then it was by the way, I'm available now. I've got bills to pay and everything else. It was what do we do? And it just came out. Katie from Manchester Digital got in touch about building a startup program, and it went from there. And then other people were there's a program here and there's that, and it's the start of it. So it kind of just became its own thing, and I've really enjoyed it. It's really fulfilling, because it kills imposter syndrome, because you sort of go, oh, I know what I'm talking about. Because if you're helping people out and you can see them actually taking that help on and advice on board to then do the next, when they do it, and you go, oh, right, brilliant, I can see you've done it, and then it's helped them move forward, and you go, right, great, and that's really fulfilling in that sense. And it's helped with looking at starting a new business with Autocomply, because I did have to question, do I want to do startups again? Do I want to do that again? And it's that network I've built over that time that's helping us move that forward before we've even got started almost. So they sort of fell into it. Like I say, it was a hand in the air kind of moment. It was the lifeline that came, which I'm very grateful for, and still doing it, like I say, in parts, but sort of shifting focus to Autocomply now while still doing bits on the side.
Yeah. That's yeah, that's so relatable to me, to be honest, because I'm just coming out of this running a web agency for 10 years, and last year we had kind of a tough year and we essentially had to let it scale down and start. Basically, it wasn't this big kind of grand exit, you know. And so yeah, just the idea that like, and it is hard, you know. I kind of also had to come to terms with this idea that like that's come to an end. It's not really what I envisaged when we started it. But then again, I couldn't really think about, you know, I think it's a bit of a different journey because we didn't necessarily have an ambition to get investment or scale or anything like that. So when I really thought about it, I was like, well, what did I really want and what was I really expecting? Actually, this, you know, this is sort of as legitimate an ending as any, you know, and then it kind of frees me up to go and do other things. With the we spoke earlier about kind of startups going for funding and it's kind of you need validation, things like that. In terms of, and it was like there was a lot of considerations there and kind of almost like downsides of the process and things you have to kind of think about. What are the biggest opportunities do you think startups can leverage at the moment, and what are we about to see over the next 6 to 12 months in terms of like startups getting funding? What kinds of ideas?
So, I mean, there's definitely an opportunity with AI, like from building. Let's say you can get something into production if you've got any technical knowledge, or you've got a technical co-founder or someone who's willing to join and go with you. You can build something inside a week that will be working properly. Like if you're doing it on your own, I've built things as a non-technical for fun, just through the AI tools. So I built a CFAX style football scores website, right? It's there, it's live, it's real, it works. I've not got a clue about how that works, but I learned as I was doing it and answering questions, and it's like, oh, I'm plugging in an API, and I've never done any of that. And it was like, oh, so I've got a bit of knowledge on that now, understand it. Just things like that you can throw together for fun that it can become real. If I tried to do that 5 years ago, an agency, that would have cost 10 grand. Like it cost me a few hours and a subscription to Bolt for 20 quid. Like, and if you've got, but there's other things where when it's been like, say like prototyping with autocomplete, I'm like, oh, that looks like it works. But then it's like, actually it's not, because it's got no authentication, it's got none of the, you know, there's loads of things missing in the back end and all this, like it needs plugging into this and everything else to make it robust and working properly, and it's not built to scale, that's where it's going to fall down and all that. So if you've got a technical person, you can go, right, here's my idea, bang, done it in a working version with an AI tool. And then you've got someone technical who can go, oh, I can build the back end and support that and everything else. Then you can start going out to customers with it and going, right, there's our thing. You know, cut in a week, 2 weeks, something like that. So I think there's a massive opportunity for anyone there within AI. And AI is now very investable. If you're doing something unique with it, doing something different with it, if you're finding something that can be automated with it, which is what we've done, we've found a really boring area that seems to be getting left alone. It's, you know, it's a niche. So that's where, like, right, we're building something that seems to be adding value and people are willing to pay for, and it's not really, there's definitely competition, but not direct domain competition. There's like, right, there's people in the area, but we actually see it as we could collaborate with that. We don't have to compete with it. So I think that's an opportunity. And I think there's a lot more in Manchester in the UK. London better than Manchester, because London has actual VCs down there and things like that. So if you're building a venture-backed business, we've got actual VCs down there. We've also got some of the US guys, Sequoia and people like that down there now. We've got an office in London, whereas Manchester, again, I'm not overly wild about the funding options you've got in Manchester, even though there's a lot more of them. But like, I still think that terms aren't great and things like that. I think that's the main issue with a lot of it. They're not built for scale opportunities and everything else. But there's a moment for AI as well. You know, AI is getting a lot of money and attention to it now, especially in America. So if you're willing to look over to the States, there's roots there. Yeah, I think the opportunity though is to be able to build with low cost to no cost, without investment, and see how far you can get. So I think that's probably the opportunity, to be honest.
Yeah, Makes sense. I agree. A few of our groups, so this week students are in groups working on MVPs, and a few of them have used like Bolt and Lovable. And yeah, we're kind of getting to grips with, well, the students are getting to grips with like the feedback loops there, and how you can kind of prompt it to provide tweaks and things like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is this like emerging tech that is fascinating. And we kind of spoke a bit about the idea that the limitations of that are that these platforms are trained on obviously all the websites that exist now, like web design conventions and stuff. So they can quite easily make something that when it first pops up, it's pretty like overwhelming in terms of like, wow, it's created this thing from a single prompt.
Yeah.
But it's really important to then sort of feed back into that, because often the kind of uniqueness of your idea might have got lost in the process, or like some of the edges have got sanded off, because actually the AI is just sort of like bundling it in with like its frames of reference and its understanding of what it thinks you might want to do. So it might not have quite understood the business model. So the importance of just sort of like refining that and giving it like, no, this isn't quite what I meant, just change this bit to that bit and change that to that bit. But which kind of then you start to see it more as a tool like anything else. It's not like a magic bullet, like you said, like money isn't magic, AI isn't magic. It's not something that's just going to create this thing for you. It's just a tool. It's just a very fast and efficient tool, that you can use to make something very quickly.
Yeah, totally. And I imagine everyone who's used it has got to that point where you get into an argument when they're going, no, I didn't want it to do that. No, not that. No, not that. I'll fix that. They do it. I fixed it. No, it's not been fixed. Okay, I'm now. No, it's not been fixed. If you get into that sort of infinite loop with it, one thing that's quite useful to do is if you get your prompts from either ChatGPT or Anthropic or something, like ask it, I want to build something that's doing this, right? And then it goes, give me the prompts that I can put it in Bolt or Lovable, Cursor, whatever. And it goes, bang, there's your prompt. You copy and paste it, and it gives it a bit more robustness to, cleaner articulation of it. So the prompt's there. The other thing is make sure that you're saying things like, don't change anything else. I just want that button. And it's like, because the amount of times you go, I needed to do this now, and it goes, right, bang, and you go, whoa, you moved, everything was perfect. Like, why did you move it from that? So there's
I've totally had that working in the like code editor, and it's taken me ages to notice that something else has changed. I'm like, when the hell did that change? That would have been like 7 prompts ago that it changed this thing because it thought it was a good idea.
But for me, I look at it as almost like a better Figma, right? So like, I can't use Figma or anything like that. I've never used them. Canva is probably about the most I use for anything, and even that, it's a brute forcing thing rather than being a wizard at using these tools. So I just see it as something where I can have a chat with something and it can come to life and I can click a button. That's how I view this, and that's where I think, like, say, I can get an idea visualized that I can then get someone else technical to make it a real thing. And I can even now push it to a point where I'm like, okay, now that actually does work, but it needs authentication and it needs a proper backend, it needs whatever it needs to make it fully robust, secure, everything else to make it work. Like, that's where you bring someone in with it. I mean, I saw a tweet this afternoon where someone was like, I've just done this thing, $50 subscription to Lovable, built the thing, and then I paid $500 to a dev in Indonesia who's built it properly and added authentication, and then it's in production. It's like, there you go. Like, that's how easy it can be to get something from nothing to real, very quick, very cheap.
Yeah. With these AI tools, there is a lot of excitement around like the possible and how quickly you can get somewhere, like we're saying. And part of me wondered if it kind of fuels that side of entrepreneurship where obviously you have kind of a vision of where you want to get to, and then there's the kind of realism aspect of where you are now. And I think these AI tools are kind of throwing a bit of like petrol on that fire of like, yeah, anything's possible, just go for it kind of thing. How do you balance that? How do you balance vision and realism, basically?
I mean, it's very easy to definitely like get battered and get your ass kicked by it. I mean, the market will ultimately tell you these things a lot of the time. And I think one of the best bits of advice I was given was by one of our investors when we were having a really tough time with our first customer. I was absolutely losing my mind. And it's the classic small customer versus like large enterprise. The large enterprise were a breeze. This tiny customer was an absolute nightmare. But we ended up as a result, getting a very good relationship with them. They renewed a contract and everything else, and became a great relationship for us. But it was my investor who said, take the emotion out of the situation. And it's that kind of thing, right? So it's can you take a step back and have a non-emotional look at what's going on, and see it like in that sense? Because like taking the two businesses I've been involved with sort of separately, my 2B was very much driven by personal passion and ambition to bring this very altruistic thing into the world. And it's the rose tinted glasses view of tech changing the world for the better kind of thing was what I was bought into, and then it kicked my ass. But we did have impact on people, which we had some amazing use cases where we changed people's lives for the better, and it was like that's what we're there for, that's what we want to do. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough of a market to make that sustainable. Like that's the sad reality of it in the end. But we're all also very proud of what we did do in that sense, and that's what like gets you out of bed when times are tough. It's like we have to keep fighting because that's what we're trying to make happen. And we pushed it probably further than it should have gone. We achieved things we probably shouldn't have achieved. Whereas the new business, it's solving a problem that we had with the last business, and it's a problem lots of other people have. And it's probably like a very unemotional attachment to it in that sense. I can be very rational about it. It's compliance. It's not a sexy thing. It's not, it is a pain, and it's something like actually that's something we can fix and solve. And that's the thing I really enjoy generally is the problem solving. So in terms of the vision, it's a case of, what are you trying to achieve here? What do you want to get out of it ultimately? And what does that look like? And being open to that being, I think there's this, you can be very strict with your vision. We're going to be this, which helps, helps align things, right? We're going to be the number one X, Y, and Z. That's what we're going to be, right? That's the vision for the, there we go. We're going to do that. It helps with that. And there's famous examples of it, Facebook, everything was about getting to 1 billion users. And that was it. Every decision that was going on in the company, does it align with that? Yes or no? It helps with things like focus and everything. So if you've got that vision and that ambition to say, there's what we're going for, like that's where you can be really rigorous with it. But I think when you have a non-emotional lens on it, it makes it a lot easier. It's very easy to focus. You go, that does not move us towards that at all. In fact, it actually detracts from it, even though it feels like painful to say no to it or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Last couple of questions. So this week, like I mentioned, students are working in groups. They've been assigned their groups on Tuesday, and they're working in groups for the presentation. I appreciate this is a very different situation, but you worked in obviously a co-founder relationship, which involves kind of a team dynamic, if you like, and compromise and having to kind of work together and play to your strengths. Do you have any advice to the teams to the people working in teams on the call, and anything that you learned working with your co-founder, and how that's different to working solo?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been on both sides of it. Whereas I started as a solo founder, then came together with my co-founder.
Okay.
So I can speak from both sides. I mean, the beauty of a co-founder is, and anything with a team, is playing to each other's strengths. So it's like, right, dividing up responsibilities. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. Right. That can be 90% of the time. That can be fine. There's times when you're both going to have to be involved in things. So as an early example of that, me and Damien will be both on sales calls. He's CTO. He's on the sales call because I'm not going to try and sell something that's technical that he can't build or we haven't done or something like that. So it's just playing to each other's strengths most of the time and dividing that up and dividing the responsibility. Be adults about it. That's another thing. It's very easy for people to, especially coming from corporate backgrounds where, you get power hungry people and things like that and everything else. But if you're just an adult and treat people like an adult and go, right, there's what we need to get done by X. Let's go and do our bits. Who's doing what? We'll come together on this day and make sure we've all done it lovely and we can communicate via whatever. Just be reasonable with it with each other and be realistic about it, I think, is in a lot of sense. But the co-founder dynamic is, I mean, I recommend it every time because it's a very lonely place to be a founder, even a co-founder. And it is that shared responsibility, sharing ideas. I mentioned earlier how I could run away with an idea and Damien would rein me in. There's things like that that it brings that balance to. If I made a mistake first time around, I probably still took too much on myself, thinking I can solve this bit. I won't worry Damien with it because I need to fix it. You know, I'm the CEO, I'm the co. I'm gonna have to go and fix that bit. Without, and he can just crack on. If he gets wind, you know, if I tell him this isn't working or whatever, he might think it's like, and I did that probably a bit too much. Not a lot, so it's not like loads of things or anything like that, but little things. And it's just like that then weighs on you, you know, and it doesn't help you become the best version of yourself or deliver your best work. But I felt that was the right thing to do, or, you know, that's what I should be doing. So, yeah, I think it's a case of, like you say, the being equal as a team, dividing the responsibility, playing to each other's strengths in the right areas, and making sure it's, like you said, coming back to it. What is it you're working towards? What is it you're trying to achieve? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And you've done your fair share of pitches in your time. What one piece of advice would you give to the students who are pitching on Friday? So it's a 15-minute pitch to almost like Dragon's Den style, like pitching the business.
Keep it simple. It sounds very easy and flippant to do. One of the most difficult things with any pitch deck and pitch that people get lost in, they know so much about this thing and they try and shoehorn all the information into a deck, into a slide. One of the best presentations I ever saw was a guy who just did hashtags. So there was a hashtag on the screen and he'd tell me about that hashtag. And you're engaged with him then, and you're listening to what he's saying, and you know that the subject is on the screen. And actually, I've had to do so many different types of pitch. I've done them without slides, I've done them with notes, without notes, all those kinds of things where it's like people try and put too much information in, and it's like, I'm not going to digest that. You know, if you've got a slide full of information, I'm going to sit there trying to read that while you're talking. You're distracting me from reading, so I'm not fully taking that in. Now I'm listening to you again. I've ignored what's on the screen, or I've only seen one out of the 18 stats you've put up. So it's like, I try and make any presentation, make the presentation as visual as possible. Like, use it as a visual aid. You know, if you're talking about a stat or a certain couple of bits of data, just have them in big that's it, bang, 2 or 3 big numbers. Don't need 10, just boom, 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 there it is. So then I can take that in and I'm listening to you. You know, that's the kind of thing. You don't have to go into the depths of every feature. Features are kind of irrelevant. Like, it's the outcome. Like, our platform does X, Y, and Z, or our product does X, Y, and Z, and actually there's what it solves. Like, no one gives a shit about the feature bit. Like, you know, if you're getting into a demo of how to use it or an onboarding piece, that's where you can go into all the nuts and bolts. This is what it solves. So that's the kind of thing I think is just try and simplify it and strip it back as much as possible, and have, you know, your appendices if you want. So if you want, you know, 15 minutes is a long presentation for this kind of thing. It might be that you get, if depending on how it's divided up, you get question and answers at the end, but it might be that you go high level financials or high level data with an appendices at the end where you can go, you know, we've got more of that if you want to ask questions, or someone says, oh, tell me about this, and you can go and find the right piece in the appendices and say, there's our full-on projection, or there's the data that actually backs that up, or whatever. I think the other thing with a pitch is try and make it conversational. Act like you're having a conversation with someone and they'll engage with you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Adam. That was all of my kind of questions and all the topics I wanted to cover. Does anyone else have any questions that we didn't get a chance to cover? If so, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute. But yeah, really appreciate you being here today, Adam. You've given up your time for us this afternoon. I'm sure you're a busy guy. So yeah,